Okay, if you're making a robot, you gotta have some pistons. That's not true, but pistons are really cool. But it's bizarrely hard to rig them up sometimes, because on the surface it's very easy. You just take the two pistons and you have them orient towards each other, so wherever they go, they're always just trying to make that piston connection. But let's get into all the different. We're just gonna go a little bit in depth. So first, track 2 constraint. Select one object, and with the eyedropper we select the other object, and now it's pointing at it. You can see as we move it around, it's rotating and flipping, and it's just doing way too much, which is why the good Lord gave us damped tracks. So we'll click on this, and basically what a damp track does, here we gotta pick the right axis here, is it tries to do the track, a track, but kind of damped with less. It tries to do less, and so here it's rotating around kind of trackball, but we're not getting that weird swivel on the wrong axis. Should I start over? I'm slurring like crazy. And so a lot of times this is actually a really good option. There's also locked track, which I think is really powerful for a lot of applications. Here we go. So it lets you lock one axis as if the piston is skewered into the wall on a bolt, which is what we want. And to find out which axis we want, let's see. I'm gonna hit R, then XX to rotate on the X-axis, on the local X-axis. And yeah, that looks like the one we want. You can do it for any of the axes. Which means we want to lock that X-axis. Now it's out like that, so we got to find the right angle. We gotta go through all of these, figure out which one negative Z. Yeah, okay. So that works good for that, and now it's extra secure. We can do the exact same thing to this one, locked track. And this works great if you don't want to bring any skeletons or anything. If you don't want to actually set up an armature. Okay, yeah, that works. That works pretty good. That said, there are problems, and I think you may have just even seen one. When you have one object track another object, that throws off the dependencies. So you have two bones, bone A and bone B, and you tell bone A, all right, look at where bone B is, now point at that bone. And then you tell bone B, okay, now look at bone A, point at that bone. But in that process, that can sometimes move bone B, and so now bone A is pointing at the wrong bone. Or say they're both parented to an object or something. So they do that whole process, Blender figures out where they're pointing, and then it goes to the next step and it's like, oh, that's right, and these objects are both parented, to different limbs, which means they're rotated like this, and it takes care of like that offset. But that means now these things aren't pointing, and so you can end up in these dependency loops. And if I were to parent these to like a couple, to these guys here, I think we could see that pretty quick. And you can even see as I move this around, every once in a while, they just kind of glitch out. Parent. Let's see what happens. If I move this, yeah, you can see we got this wiggle. It's no good. Sometimes the wiggle is intense, sometimes it's less. You might think maybe it's because like it doesn't know which axis because they're aligned, but that is not the case. It gets a little bit messy. So let's do it with an actual proper rig, because rigs are our allies. That said, there is a way around the dependency hiccups, and that's where if you just select the object, and let's see, add an empty to the object's origin. Let's see, cursor to selected, and let's add an empty here, and you just parent the other empty instead of the other object, then they're not targeting each other. And I think that's basically the go-to solution for stuff like this. Add object constraint, damped track, yes, to that one, and you get the damped track to the other one. Figure out the right axes, Z, negative Z, and make sure these are parented to their corresponding objects. And there they go. Now they're pistoning, but they're not glitching out. An even lazier option is just a stretch to constraint, where you just stretch the entire thing between the two empties. So we'll parent this one to that one, and we will stretch to that empty, and it doesn't know. Let's see, is it? Woo! It's going kind of crazy. So let's see. I'm just going to go cursor to selected, set it to rotate the 3D cursor. I'm just going to rotate all of the mesh to just fit the axis it wants. But yeah, there we go. Then it kind of squashes and stretches. We can turn off maintain volume, and it'll stretch on one axis without also poofing out. But that is... Oh, great. Well, it certainly is seeming like a more complicated solution the longer I go on. But once you have this, then you can just, you know, duplicate these. And have those pistons. It's actually sometimes useful. So I'm gonna set this the piston up so it's as high as it can get, right about there. And let's create a rig. I'm gonna shift right click to set the 3D cursor, and I'm just gonna build the rig right next to these pistons just to make life a little bit easier. So I'm gonna hit Shift A, and I'm gonna add a new armature. Tab to go into edit mode, just like with mesh, and I'm gonna line this up. This is gonna be the piston, you know, for this lower bone, till it just kind of lines up with the top of that piston. This next bone is actually going to be the stretch bone that creates the empty space in between the two pistons, and this will be the bone for the final piston. There we go. And since it's, so we're doing this with IK because I love IK because it's really flexible and it gives you just a bunch of different options for how to solve different rigging things. And but that also means we need a control bone. And so I'm going to, you might think, oh, we'll just extrude it up and make that the control bone, but I'm actually going to create one just right here and offset it just the tiniest bit. And the reason for that is because one of many restrictions with IK is it's trying to solve the way the arms should bend. And if all of the bones are perfectly aligned and you have a control bone, you say, all right, now let's go over here. It can go in any direction. And so it has no idea what you want. It's like, where's the elbow? What are we doing? And so all you need to do is put a little bit of an imperfection into that chain, and it kind of has an idea of like, okay, well then this is the most efficient way to do that, and you've given it something to work with effectively. So having this offset just a tad means that this will actually work. And so now if we go into pose mode, we can apply constraints, and all we have to do is shift click on that bone, and then so you select the bone that you want to be the control bone, shift click on the bone you want to control, then shift I brings up the hotkey to just add the IK. And let's see, maybe I'll, yeah. And now we've got our little IK chain, and all we have to do now is constrain everything. So under the bone options, under IK, we can lock the IK, which means it won't be part of the IK solution. In fact, let's do that for this one too. So now the only bone solving anything is the very bottom bone, and this is really useful. In fact, let's lock that bottom bone as well. Now nothing happens. It is an IK chain, but we've constrained everything, and so it has nothing it can do. That said, there is an option called stretch. So we can turn up stretch, and it will solve it to the best of its ability. You can see it's always reaching, up as high as it can to the bone, and it crunches down until it meets that other bone, which is cool. That means our piston will never go further than it physically could, and we just get to introduce one level of rotation back in. One thing that's really handy when you're working with armatures and stuff is to turn on the axes. So let's click on Data Properties, turn on Axes, and now we can easily see, okay, we want it to be as if that Z is skewering it into the wall. We want that to be the one it can rotate on. So we'll just free that up, and now we've got a piston going, and we just have to parent the objects to it. Parenting to an I've said this a million times, but you click on the object, then you shift click on the rig, and because it's selecting the entire rig, you're not selecting a specific bone, so you have to go into pose mode, select the bone you want, hit Control P, great, parent it to bone, go back into object mode, select the object you want, select the armature, go into pose mode, select the bone, Control P, parent to bone, and that is, my edit came up. And that's it. There you've rigged a piston. If you want, you could rig it up so that this bone doesn't go any further than this. I think you'd apply a limit location or limit distance option and just say, hey, so this bone can never get any further than would logically make sense from this bone, and that's pretty fun. So with all of that in mind, let's jump over to the in-progress spatula arm. I don't know, it's going okay. I've got a bunch of videos I made talking about how to make different types of pieces like this, but nothing I totally like yet. But I was looking right here, and I realized it looked fairly, weak. So I added this linkage here, with the thought being that, this piston would push out down on this linkage, down on the back of the forearm, which would push that up, and that would be how the arm kind of goes like that. I have another linkage right here that's going to do kind of the same thing, but I liked also having one just there on the elbow. It just kind of, it felt like it worked. So we can do this fairly easily. Here, I'm going to isolate all of this, and just make sure on both axes that I'm more or less centered. Yeah. Go into edit mode for the armature, and just hit Shift A to add a new bone. Woo! Gonna drag that out like this, and that'll be the stretch bone, and this will be the bone that we parent this whole thing to. It won't stretch, but it'll be kind of locked to it. You'll see. And then extrude this down to the center of that one, and that's basically all we need. We do need our control bone, so we'll extrude that out. Alt-P to clear the parent. It's its own bone now. If we go into, and let's see here, I guess it's a little confusing that we're in solo view. I want this is going to be connected to the forearm here, so I'm going to parent this bone to that forearm. Pow! And I want to parent this one to the upper arm. Great! And now I think it's basically ready for the constraints. So I'm going to select the control bone, and then shift-click on the bone I want to control. Hit Shift-I, that's the hotkey for the IK. Woo! And it's moving the entire thing, and that's because the IK chain goes all the way past what we want to the very root of the entire arm. So we just turn this up, click, 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 until that yellow dotted line is going to the first bone we want to be able to affect with this bone. Cool. And let's see, let's parent these objects to the bones real quick. Parent to that one. The other one's going to be the stretch bone. And now we just have to tweak some of the IK settings. And so we don't want either of these to rotate, really. So I'm going to, they're just going to be mounted right in the piston hole. So select both of them, and Alt-click and drag on all three of those. So those are locked, but we do want the stretch bone to be able to stretch. So now ideally it's working okay. If we wanted, you can see that the Z-axis is what's skewing this, so we could like lock everything but the Z-axis, but I actually don't think we need to do that. Like, it works now if we move the bones around, it won't break the linkage, but I don't think it's particularly important. But one thing I found is when I was doing some test animations, the piston had to move so far for what I thought was like a fairly minor arm movement, and that's because this joint is so far away from the elbow joint that like it's having to swing all the way from down here to up here, which is a lot of ground to cover. So if we just let's bring this up kind of tight like that. So if we just set this as close as we can to that elbow joint, it's going to have a lot less distance it's going to have to cover. And I think that's kind of cool. So it's up to you. If you want, the things to be going crazy, you can keep them far away. Just a lot of times that means you have to have a really long piston to eat up all that slack. So yeah. All right, that's kind of cool. Cool.